What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, I have 5 sleepers that you can target in the later rounds of your Dynasty Fantasy Football startups, or if you've already joined a league, maybe you can trade for these players on the cheap, put them on the back end of your roster, and maybe people are sleeping on them enough that they might be a contributor for your roster because people just aren't paying attention. So, as always, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel, but without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these sleepers. Alright, so the first player I want to talk about here in today's video is going to be Darnell Mooney, wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. His current startup ADP in his draft round is the 150th overall player off the board. That's a 13th round startup pick. Now, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 60, and despite being drafted outside of the top 60 wide receivers in startups, Mooney has a secure role as Atlanta's wide receiver 2 and is under contract for multiple seasons, making him a reliable depth piece at a steep discount. Mooney was quietly a top 10 fantasy wide receiver through the first 10 weeks of the 2024 season, driven by explosive performances against favorable matchups like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whom of course he will be playing again twice in 2025, including a week 1 matchup. And while his floor isn't necessarily high, Mooney has already shown that he can deliver flex-worthy numbers and spike weeks when game script, matchup, or quarterback play tilt his way. He's the type of player who becomes especially valuable in leagues that start 3 wide receivers or have multiple flex spots, offering weekly usability during bye weeks or when you need injury fill-ins. Plus, with Michael Penix Jr. expected to elevate and take over this Falcons offense here in 2025, Mooney becomes a cheap way to buy into potential offensive upside at a much cheaper rate than some of the other guys in this offense like Drake London and Bijan Robinson. Now, moving on to the next player I want to talk about, let's talk Jordan Mason, running back for the Minnesota Vikings. His startup ADP is the 159th player overall. That's a 14th round startup pick, and he's being drafted as the running back 45. Now, Jordan Mason looked like a league winner during the first half of 2024, averaging 95 rushing yards per game while filling in for CMC and showing he's capable of handling a lead back role if given the opportunity. Plus, Minnesota didn't just sign him, they traded for him after San Francisco placed a second round tender on him, which should speak volumes about how highly they value his potential as more than just a backup. He enters the 2025 season behind a 30-year-old Aaron Jones who's coming off his heaviest workload in years, setting up a plausible path for Mason to lead this backfield at some point this season. And amongst running backs with 75 plus carries in 2024, Mason ranked top 10 in both broken tackle rate and yards after contact per attempt, suggesting he wasn't just benefiting from the scheme in San Francisco, he's legitimately talented. In a high-powered Vikings offense with a young, high-upside quarterback under center, Mason is a strong late-round option as a flex play with high league-winning type of upside, especially if Aaron Jones were to miss any time here during the 2025 season or beyond. Let's go back to the wide receiver position. I want to talk Cedric Tillman, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. His startup ADP is the 168th overall player off the board. That is also a 14th round startup pick, and he's being drafted as the wide receiver 64. Now, Cedric Tillman flashed real upside during a short stretch last year, averaging 10 targets and 75 yards per game from weeks 7 through 11, including 3 straight top 16 fantasy finishes before a concussion shut him down for the rest of the season. And with Amari Cooper gone, Tillman should have every opportunity to carve out a starting role alongside Jerry Jeudy, who hasn't exactly been the clearest picture of consistency or health throughout the entirety of his career. The Browns' quarterback situation is murky, but Tillman showed the ability to produce even with instability under center, especially when he started clicking with Jameis Winston during his breakout month. Tillman's rookie deal runs through 2026, which gives him 2 more seasons of opportunity in a wide open wide receiver room with very little depth beyond Jerry Jeudy, and if one of these quarterbacks proves to be even above average, he should be able to outperform his current ADP. That said, Cedric Tillman is the classic late round sleeper type of profile, a low investment cost, an undefined but promising role, and a small but meaningful track record when he's been given volume. And this type of player can be especially valuable in those deeper lineup leagues or those dynasty best ball formats. Let's move on to the tight end position. I want to talk about tight end Brenton Strange for the Jacksonville Jaguars. His current startup ADP is the 179th overall player. That is a 15th round startup pick, and he's being drafted as the tight end 26. Brenton Strange enters 2025 as the clear tight end 1 in Jacksonville after Evan Engram's departure, and while he didn't do much as a rookie, his sophomore year offered glimpses of fantasy relevance when pressed into action, and he averaged 5 targets and finished as a top 10 tight end in 4 of the 7 games where he played over 68% of the snaps. And although he's unlikely to command high-end target volume with Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter expected to lead lead this receiving core. Strange's path to being a full-time player is clear, and he's a sneaky bet for red zone looks given his 6'4" frame and solid athleticism. The addition of offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, known for utilizing tight ends and simplifying reads for his quarterbacks, bodes well for Strange's involvement in the weekly game plan, especially if the Jaguars' offense takes the step forward many expect it to. The Jags didn't draft and sign any serious tight end competition this offseason, and Strange still has 2 years left on his rookie deal, meaning he could develop into a steady tight end 2 with tight end 1 upside in the right game environments, or if there were ever any injuries to the starting wide receivers in this offense. In a tight end landscape where the bar for fantasy relevance is set pretty low, Strange checks the boxes you want in a late round sleeper who has a locked in role, an ascending offense, and has shown glimpses of usability, which makes him a great grab if you're waiting on tight end in your drafts or if you're playing in those deeper formats. And now the last player I want to talk about is running back Roschon Johnson for the Chicago Bears. His startup ADP is the 210th overall player. He's being drafted in the 18th round of those startups, and he's being drafted as the running back 64. And while Roschon Johnson's raw efficiency at just 2.7 yards per carry was brutal in 2024, the surface numbers hide his sneaky value. He handled 6 carries inside the 5-yard line, tied with Joe Mixon and James Cook, and converted them into touchdowns at a solid rate, carving out a meaningful role as Chicago's preferred goal line back. Now, the arrival of head coach Ben Johnson raises eyebrows when it comes to roles in the backfield, because in 2022, Ben Johnson oversaw a Lions running back committee where DeAndre Swift, despite being the more explosive back, gave up a ton of early down and goal line work to Jamal Williams, who racked up 17 rushing touchdowns in that offense. If Johnson deploys a similar strategy in Chicago, Roschon could be the 2025 version of Jamal Williams, not flashy, but valuable in short yardage, clock killing, and scoring situations, especially in an offense that should improve if Caleb Williams takes a year 2 jump. So even if Swift gets the starter label, Roschon's third-year profile and size make him a great stash in deeper leagues or zero running back builds, because Chicago didn't spend real draft capital at the position, just a 7th rounder on Kyle Monangai, which gives him a clear path to volume than most running backs in the same ADP range. That said, Roschon Johnson is one of the few running backs being drafted outside the top 60 at his position that has a real legitimate shot at 8+ touchdowns if the role breaks right, making him an ideal late round dart throw on rosters that need some flexibility, or maybe some rosters where you're looking for some late round upside. Alright, so there you have it. That is 5 sleepers that you can draft late in your Dynasty startup drafts. All of these players are outside of the top 150 players. Those 12-man leagues, obviously that's 13 rounds deep. 10-man, you're even looking at 15 rounds deep. So hopefully you guys can find some sleepers that you can add to your teams that maybe become some difference makers for you, or at least usable assets for you here during the 2025 season. If you've already done your startups, like I said, you can probably trade for these guys cheap as well. So if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments down below. And while you're down there, make sure you go hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. And last but not least, make sure you go join our free Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with your Dynasty fantasy football teams 24/7, 365. And like I said, it's free to join, so there is no risk in doing that. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you on our next episode. But until then, peace out.